This is pre-algebra lesson 2-1, properties of numbers. Now these properties you may have heard of before, some of you may not have heard of them. You don't have to memorize them per se, but you do need to be familiar with them and understand what they are about. The commutative property says changing the order of addition or multiplication does not matter. Commutative comes from the word commute. If you know what the word commute means, it means to get from one place to another place. How you get to school doesn't matter. You can drive a different route every day if you want, as long as you get to school on time. They don't care how you get from point A to point B, as long as you get from point A to point B. Same thing happens with addition and multiplication. The order in which you add something or the order in which you multiply something doesn't matter. 3 plus 2 is the same as 2 plus 3. 3 times 2 is the same as 2 times 3. The associative property says changing the grouping of values when adding or multiplying does not matter. Associative, think of who you associate with. That is your group of friends. That's an easy way to remember the associative property. It has to do with grouping symbols. For example, I could add 3 plus 2 first and then add 5. Or I can add 2 plus 5 first and then add 3. Either way, I'm still going to get 10. The additive identity is 0. When you add a number and 0, the sum equals the original number. The only number that you can add to something and keep the original value is 0. So the additive identity is 0. Anything plus 0 stays the same. The multiplicative identity is 1. What can you multiply by a number and not change the original number? The only number that can happen with is 1. So 6 times 1 equals 6. X times 1 equals x, and so on. Now these 4 properties are important because we can use them to make our lives a little easier. Okay? First of all, we have to be able to identify the properties. So let's see if we can name them. We look at number 1 here. Name the property shown. Z times 1 equals Z. Here we have, all we did was multiply something by 1 and it stayed to the original. So this has to be the multiplicative identity. Or the identity property of multiplication. It doesn't matter how you say it. It's the multiplicative identity or the identity property of multiplication. Number 2, 3 times z quantity times m, or 3 quantity z times m. Notice what was in the parentheses changed. The order stayed the same. You had 3, then z, then m. You still have 3, then z, then m. The difference was what was in the parentheses changed. So if it's only what's within the parentheses that changed, it's the associative property, and it happens to be the associative property of multiplication because we're multiplying versus adding. Number 3, 7 plus q equals q plus 7. Notice the order changed. 7 came first on the left-hand side, but q comes first on the right-hand side. When we change the order, that's the commutative property. So there we have being able to identify our properties. Now we can use these properties to be able to simplify things. The key here is to look for combinations of things that are easy to add and multiply. Combinations of 10 or 5 or 0, something that makes it easy to multiply or easy to add. All right, let's take a look at this first problem here. I'm looking at this going, gee, it doesn't look like it's too simple, but if I group 14 plus 6, that easily gives me 20, and 20 plus 7 is 27. So that's how I would use the associative property here. Okay? So that makes it much, much easier. And I know it says use mental math, but I have to show you what I'm doing in order for you to understand what I'm doing. Same thing with you. You need to just write out a little bit of what you're doing so that I can pick up on how you did it. For example, number 5, I would take 19 and add 21 to that first, because that gives me 40. And 40 minus 30 is 10. Okay. Try to find combinations of things that are easy to add or easy to multiply. If I look at this next problem, 25 times 3 times 4, I'm going to change that. I don't want to multiply 3 times 4 first, because 12 times 25 is hard. But if I did 25 times 4, that's 100, and if I multiply that by 3, it's 300. That's really simple. So by changing the order, changing what I grouped together, that made it so much easier for me. Okay. Continuing. Take a look at number 7 here. 5 plus 12 plus 18 plus 5. Okay. Easiest thing for me, I'm going to group the 5s together, and I'm going to group the 12 and 18 together, because that gives me something that ends in 0. 5 plus 5 is 10, 18 and 12 is 30, 10 plus 30 is 40. Very simple to do, and these are the things that I do in my head, which is why I can add and subtract and multiply and divide so quickly, is because I group things up that can be grouped up so that I can make my computations easier. If I look at this next one, I'm going to associate 2 and negative 15, and then multiply it by negative 18. Right? Because 2 and negative 15 is negative 30 times negative 18. So then I only have to multiply 18 times 3, and 18 times 3 is 54, and add a 0, so this becomes 540, and it's positive because I have 2 negative signs. But here, I'm going to group these two and group these two, so I'm going to have 3 times negative 40. 4 times 3 is 12, so this makes this negative 120. You can use your properties of numbers, if you know your properties of numbers, to make your computations much easier.